What's going on, everyone? I am just a typical, average American here today to react to something really significant that I just became aware of between Canada and the United States. So I think that Canadians, you're aware of this phenomenon that happens every few years here in the United States. And what I'm talking about is when things get bad here in the US, you start to hear more and more Americans say stuff like, okay, the US is going to hell, so I'm moving to Canada, which, to be honest, is actually a little bit depressing for me to hear. Nothing against Canada, but by saying that, it really means that a lot of us are admitting that the United States is beyond saving, so we just have to like abandon ship. But it's also kind of funny at the same time because we just assume that Canada would even want like a huge influx of Americans to come live with you. So, according to this report here, a new law in Canada may actually make millions of Americans eligible to become Canadians? That's what it says here. Is that true? Like, are you guys sure about that? Like, is that what you want? Okay, well, today I want to check this out and learn more about this. So let's take a look.
I was born in Notre Dame de Ham.
Growing up in a small Massachusetts town, Mary and Ryan Hamill always knew of their French-Canadian roots.
French meat pie was a staple, split pea soup.
Ryan's great-grandfather immigrated to the U.S. from Quebec in the early 1900s. Mary's great-great-grandfather came in the late 1800s. More than a century later, the American couple, already living and working in...
Whoa, this is interesting. We're talking about like ancestry and like your heritage, where your parents came from, or your parents' came from. And I don't know if you guys have this in Canada, but it's really popular here in the US for Americans to want to find out where our ancestors came from, and kind of like, I don't know, not like brag about, but be like, you do that test where you like you mail your spit in a tube off to somebody, and they tell you a detailed report of like your DNA and who you're related to and where you come from, which is pretty cool. And a lot of Americans do that stuff, and it's very popular and common. And you'd be like, on St. Patrick's Day, you're like, I'm 12% Irish, so top of the morning to ya. Like, we get way too excited about it. I've actually never heard anyone really talk about Canadian ancestry. It's usually like who you're related to from Europe or some obscure country, like a lot of Ireland and like Scottish or Romanian or whatever it is. So yeah, these Americans are actually Canadian, which I don't know enough about Canadian history to know in detail, like like if they're related to people from Quebec, that'd probably be related to people who are from France, right? So, okay, that makes sense. Anyway, not something that you really hear too often, at least in my experience.
More than a century later, the American couple, already living and working in Montreal, is now set to become Canadian themselves.
Oh, wow. So this American couple, like, have ancestors, relatives, who moved from Canada to the US, and now they have moved back to Canada, specifically Quebec, and they are literally becoming Canadian citizens, which, I mean, I would imagine that's not too easy. Like, there's a process. Like, there's a long process, I know, to apply to become like an American citizen, and you gotta like show all this stuff, or be married to somebody or a relative, or anyway, I don't know exactly how it works immigrating to Canada, but they did it, so good for them.
taking advantage of a new law.
I love
Oh.
now that I live in Quebec and we're getting the lay of the land and visiting more places. I can look in the maps and say, oh, this is where Nana was born.
Bill
Whoa, wait a minute. They're taking advantage of the new law. That's the whole, right, that's the whole point of this, right? I almost forgot. Yeah, so the headline said there's a new law that might make millions of Americans eligible to become Canadian citizens. Is this new law, it's in effect. So it's in effect. It happened. And these two Americans took advantage. Now they're Canadian. What happened? What is it? What's the criteria?
Bill C-3, nicknamed the Lost Canadians Act, opens the door for people with Canadian ancestors to apply for citizenship.
What? No kidding. Wow. That's fast. So you don't have to have a living relative in Canada. That's more what I would think of when I think of like immigration. You need like a family member to sponsor you or something like that. But usually they gotta be like alive, you know? This is, if you have any Canadian ancestry, dead or alive, it's the Lost Canadians Act. You can return to the motherland. You can go back to Canada. What? That's, because like I said on our little ancestry DNA reports that some people do, I don't even know if it, does it say if you are related to Canadian DNA, or is that weird to say? Or so any American who's related to any Canadian can do that, can apply and become Canadian citizen? Is that actually true?
Great grandmother, great grandfather, great 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 grandfather. It does not matter. There's no limit on how many generations you can go back as long as you can prove it.
What? Oh my God. I would think, like, and maybe it's kind of a sign of the times. Like I said, this becomes more exciting or enticing to Americans when times are bad, and they've, right now, you know, things have never been more insane here in the US. So I would think, I haven't heard about this before. Like, this is not huge news in the US, and maybe it should probably be bigger news, because I think there's a lot of Americans who'd be very interested in this, especially at, like, in these times. I have no, like, I don't know if I'm related. Like, my great 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 grandpa's uncle's cousin could be Canadian. I don't know. Maybe, like, I could become Canadian, like, if in some crazy universe. That's just funny to even think about, that's like actually not just possible, but very realistic for any of us Americans who can prove any relation to a Canadian. That's funny. That's interesting. Wow, that's not that hard, right? Compared to like whatever the process used to be. This sounds much more like broad. Wow.
The new legislation is creating overwhelming demand here at the National Archives in Montreal.
Oh. So if you got to come up with the proof, you might have to like go to the National Archives in Canada and like dig up your great 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 nana's birth certificate or something to like find the proof.
In January alone, Quebec archivists received more than 1,000 requests to authenticate birth records, up from just 32 in the same month last year.
So okay, I haven't heard about this. and certainly I haven't heard about this in any kind of mainstream American news, but clearly there's a lot of Americans who are aware of this. Maybe it's those who are like predisposed, like the most interested, who are already interested in immigrating. Like those are the ones who probably knew about this, but this is not common knowledge in the U.S. But that apparently there are still thousands of Americans who are still taking advantage of this right now. Like, I feel like if this was announced on national news in the U.S., Canada could see like tens of thousands of applications or requests for this. And seriously, like, wow, I think a lot of Americans would genuinely be interested to know this.
The process is lengthy. We have to go back to the original register, which is not always in a great state just because it's so old.
With significant economic migration from Quebec to New England in the late 1800s and early 1900s,
Wow.
about 10 million Americans could be eligible to become Canadian.
So there was like a lot of immigration. There are documented historical records. There were times when there were like lots of Canadians who immigrated to the US, like they're saying, okay, and they're estimating based on that alone. They're like 10 million. That's like, 1 out of 35, 1 out of 40 Americans could just immigrate to Canada if they wanted. That's like, but the estimate is that's how many are. That's a huge number of Americans. That's amazing.
According to this historian,
They're very excited to have this sense that there's an official recognition that they still belong to something.
Yeah. Wow. Because I'm also thinking like, it's funny because here in the US, immigration is such a hot topic, such a debated issue in the US. And I think a lot of people would be very nervous to try to go through immigrating to the US right now. And I don't exactly know how that all looks like in Canada. I think there's some debate or talking with immigration in Canada and laws being changed and that kind of stuff. I know there's some stuff going on, but this is kind of different. This is like a very specific law, like not aimed directly at Americans, but happens to affect like 10 million Americans who might be related to Canadians. Wow.
Birthplace, Canada.
the Hamels are finalizing their citizenship applications, planning to stay in Montreal, driven north by the political climate in the U.S.
That's exactly what I would think. Like, just hearing this, my first thought is like, the political climate here. Exactly. That would be, it's a huge motivator, I think, for the vast majority of Americans who are interested in this. And yeah, genuinely, I don't know if I don't think I have any Canadian ancestors. I feel like I would have heard, like, my parents or great or grandparents or somebody mention that. It's like, I don't think it's a thing for me. So it's not in the cards.
I already feel Canadian in at least my heart.
Finding a new home and sense of belonging through ancestors, generations apart. Alexander Silberman, CBC News, Montreal.
This is like so significant, and I just keep thinking about how I hadn't heard anything about this. And I think there's like 10 million Americans who would at least like to know that this is an option. And it's like they said, like, if you do have an ancestor who comes from Canada, you probably it'd probably be intriguing to a lot of Americans to be like, hey, that's kind of my home, or like, where my grandma came from, or, probably have an interest. And yeah, this is fascinating. And kind of like, I don't know, it's kind of like came out of nowhere. I don't know if this is unprecedented, but just, like here in the US, I'm pretty sure we don't have any law like this. This is very friendly, where it's like, if your grandma was born in America, but you were born 2 generations later somewhere else, like in some other continent, I don't think we would be so friendly like this to offer like a pathway to citizenship. That's really cool. That's really, really cool that Canada is doing that. And you might have a bunch of annoying Americans on your hands who take advantage. But yeah, it's also just like cool to like think about. It's just a nice like relationship between the U.S. and Canada, and during a time where we're kind of having a differences and drama, and this is nice. So anyway, if you enjoyed this, feel free to give this video a like, or leave a comment with your thoughts. If you're Canadian, or if you think this is a good if this is a good idea, or if you know about this, or you know somebody who has done this, or anything like that, it'd be really cool to hear about. And if you're interested in more videos like this, me reacting to Canadian things that I've never seen before or learned about, feel free to subscribe for more. And until then, thanks for watching, and see you next time.